we're moving into a world where it's around intelligence orchestration. And some of those will be people, some of them will be agents, digital agents. And those digital agents will be doing their own reasoning and taking decisions and doing things. But as a leader, you're going to have to orchestrate it all. And that challenges the very concept of leadership, because I no longer have all the information. I'm no longer the most knowledgeable person at the top of the organization. I'm actually dealing with people who are smarter and agents who are much smarter than me.
Technology has transformed how we live, work, and connect. And behind that change are visionary people with bold ideas. Welcome to the Bridgecast, where host Scott Kinka explores hybrid work, AI, and our evolving future with tech's brightest minds. Presented by Bridgepoint Technologies, the nation's leading tech advisory firm. Experience a better way. The Bridgepoint way.
With so many AI solutions on the market, how can organizations ensure they're choosing the right technologies that deliver real business value? Today's guest is at the forefront of helping enterprises navigate this AI-driven transformation. Tony Moroney is the principal at the Digital Explorer, where he advises global brands on digital disruption, innovation, and importantly, and pertinent to this conversation, AI strategy. He's got over 17 years of experience spanning industries like financial services, tech, consulting. Tony has guided executive teams in harnessing AI and digital transformation to drive measurable business outcomes and create impactful customer experiences. Tony, welcome to the Bridgecast.
Scott, thank you. Delighted to be here.
You know, AI, automation, the metaverse, I mean, things are going on at a faster pace than most IT leaders have the time to think about. In your recent articles, you pointed out a paradox, right? When everything can be built quickly, what becomes valuable, I think, was sort of what we pulled out. Tell us a little bit more about that concept.
Well, if we think about it, on one level, people are arguing that AI, particularly generative AI, et cetera, is a general purpose technology. So if it's a general purpose technology, and look, I believe it is, it's going to be the same as electricity. It's going to be the same as, the internet. Well, but that means it's table stakes and everyone else has it. So how are you going to differentiate? Because if we're all using the same large language models and they're all using the same embedded reasoning, well, we're all going to end up with the same answers. So, that will lead to a commoditization of many markets unless, Scott, we think about, well, actually, what are the unique human factors that we're going to bring to our business and that is going to be used to drive how we use these models? But also what is the ambition of our organization? And what are we actually trying to do for customers? Because the starting point has to be, what are we trying to achieve with our customers, not what we're trying to achieve with the technology. And my concern is that, look, there's a lot of organizations blindly jumping into technology solutions because on one level, boards are putting executives under pressure. Oh, you better be seen to do something with AI. So, AI washing is the new greenwashing, but they're
or clouds, right?
Yeah. So they're under pressure.
We'll get some.
So they need to be able to say, oh, we're doing something with AI. Well, yeah, but, ultimately, I think the real challenge is forget about the technology. Think about what is it you need to do for your business to be relevant and competitive in the future. And in that context, how would you get there? And in that context, what role does AI play in supporting that? And the problem that I see with organizations is, they're all grabbing, large language models or, generative AI or, agentic AI. They all want agentic AI now. And one of my articles, I posed this question, which was another paradox in terms of, well, whose organization is becoming more clever? Is it the handful of companies that own the large language models, or is it the companies that are using the large language models? Right? And that's a really deep question that an organization should ask, because it plays into the point you raised. Well, if it's the former, so actually the open AIs and these guys, they're getting all the intelligence and becoming cleverer, and we're all now utility users of their platforms. Well, where do we differentiate, or how can we differentiate? Because we're all going to get the same answers because we're all using the same tools. And I suppose it's an interesting question that I'm not sure many boards or many executive teams have stopped to ask themselves. And it's probably because they have this fixation of being seen to do something, as opposed to having a considered perspective in terms of why do we need AI in the first place? Because if you can't answer that question, I would suggest, you're doing some nice experiments, but that's all they are.
Well, there's a bunch of things there I want to pull out. I mean, one is the sort of AI for AI's sake. Are we doomed to repeat cloud, right? I think part of this is finding use cases, and we've had quite a bit of conversation on this show, and I do, in my day job, have quite a bit of conversation around identifying use cases. But I want to unpack your thing about sort of the commonality of the answers coming out of large language models first, right? Is this where businesses just sort of need to focus their energy right now in terms of creating a little bit of AI muscle inside the business before they're trying to solve problems? Number one, at the end of the day, like, is that a reasonable step in as opposed to trying to go do something really big? Partially, I think a corollary to that is the step two to use case development around going a level beyond the LLMs and sort of just, leveraging them for general intelligence while having specific intelligence around sort of RAG and agentic models that are specific to the business. But we'll explore the second one. Let's start with the first part of that, which was really around kind of almost businesses just focusing maybe on AI literacy first inside the business.
Yeah, and look, I would say, most executives can spell AI, but it's kind of stuck there. And the problem is, the problem, Scott, is that if we think about the average age of your executive team or your board, they were born and were educated pre the internet, pre the smartphone, invariably, and now we're in a world where actually, 3 years ago we weren't talking about generative AI. Now it's everyone's talking about it. We're now talking about agentic AI. We're talking about quantum. We're talking about all these type of things. So at best, the people leading our organizations are acquiring some knowledge of the different technologies that are coming at us. So the question really is, if we think about it as a technology, are we actually closing our mind down? Because most executives run scared when they think it's a technology discussion, right? And for me, it's not about the technology. The technology is a means to an end. It's not an end in its own right. And so if we think about the business and the business problems and the business challenges and the desire to be relevant and competitive in the future, that now puts any conversation around AI in context. So yes, literacy is really important, but it's not about teaching executives how to build algorithms. They don't need to know how to build an algorithm. But they sure as hell need to understand, well, what does an algorithm do and what type of outcomes will it drive in my business? And why have the safeguards in place to make sure that they are good outcomes? And so it's not about the technology, because that's just an enabler. It's a tool. And I think this is the problem for organizations, they're being, bombarded by tech companies, by, consulting firms, whatever, and they're coming at them, here's a technology to solve all your problems. Well, actually, can we spend some time as you alluded to, can we spend some time to actually talk about our problems in the first place?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Because if we understand what we're trying to do, and we understand how we need to change the business to be able to achieve that, we now have a context for where AI fits. So, but we do need to invest in education, because, having a bland conversation around AI, for a lot of people, that is, that's not an engaging conversation unless we can actually bring it into, let's talk about this in the context of our business. What does it enable our business to do? How can it enable our business to achieve its aims? Let's talk about it in that context. Let's not talk about technology. Let's not talk about large language models, because, most boards will be, they'll be going to sleep by the time you get to the end of that conversation. Bring it back to, let's talk about the business, and let's talk about what we're trying to do here and how this could help us.
Let me offer you an alternative. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because we have this very same conversation with business leaders often. And very often you're like, well, what are you trying to solve with AI? Or what are you trying to solve inside the business? And the connection between the two things is very difficult to get. Meanwhile, where like ChatGPT is the number one shadow IT app of all time, right? In terms of usage and the pace of adoption, right? So it's inside of these businesses now already, right? Setting aside all the security issues and, privacy issues that unsanctioned use of AI inside of the business present. We'll chat about that in a minute, but let's set that aside for a moment. These end users are actually trying to use AI to do something inside the business. I mean, tell me about that as the source for use case. Like, is that a place that you go with customers who are kind of like, I need AI, I just don't know what the hell I'm going to use it for?
Yeah, and I'd always start with the question, well, why do you need AI? Because I'm reminded of the old westerns, and the guy used to come into town and he'd have the black oil, and this solves every ailment. There's a lot of that going on. So you really need to take it back to sort of say, look, if your problem is around customer experience, let's unpack that. And what are we trying to, where are we having challenges with customers? If our problem is in terms of going to market, let's unpack that and understand that. If our problem is around data, and look, let's be honest, data is a huge problem because organizations, they're not data centric, and therefore they're going to struggle with AI. So, but let's understand actually what our problem is, not apply, one size fits all solutions to every company, because that's not going to work, and it's not going to help any organization get to where it needs to. It has to be about, if the organization has clarity of its vision and its purpose, if it knows where it is today and it knows how it needs to change to achieve its ambition, well, now we can have a meaningful conversation in terms of, well, what role AI could play within that. And if that's around creating better customer experience, okay, well, how? What are the things we would need to do to create a better customer experience? Is it better insight? Is it real-time translation? Or what is it that we want? And then we can see how AI can support the achievement of that. But just sort of saying, well, look, here's one here, we can throw this into the pot. Because the issue you're going to have is it's going to be another technology overlay onto an organization, and your employees are going to be saying to themselves, is this management taking steps to basically right-size the organization, and will I have a job? And, that never works out well in terms of technology implementations, as you well know, because, people don't embrace, they don't adapt, they don't use. How many organizations have you been in where, there is loads of technology, but no one uses it? I was with one organization, and they said to me they were getting a particular CRM system, and I said, great, what's that going to do for you? And they said, it's going to give us loads of data. And I said, but you have loads of data today and you don't use any of it, so what's going to be different? They couldn't answer the question, but someone had sold them a new CRM system.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, tech for tech's sake. We go down these rabbit holes every couple of years. This is sort of the new thing, right? Now we're on AI. Help me out with this. You mentioned customer experience a minute ago, and we had quite a bit of chat about that in the open. It's an area where we, at Bridgepoint, spend quite a bit of time, and it also seems like the area where I guess AI has been embedded, maybe without even calling it that to some extent, in the CX organizations of these businesses for some time. We're often telling our customers, use what you got. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, here's all these things. If you got to go do some AI, there's already embedded features in the platform that you purchase for CX or, in your productivity suite. Like, let's turn that on. Let's figure out where we can baby step right now. But do you have an opinion on why you feel like a lot of these use cases land in the customer experience category first?
Well, I would argue actually a lot of them end up in the cost and compliance category.
Okay. Oh, well, tell me, let's explore that, but certainly address the customer experience one as well.
I think the issue there is that's going to be table stakes. Everyone will do that. So being efficient and being compliant, well, everyone is going to do that, and everyone will use AI. So that's not going to differentiate your business. So unless you're going to create new insights and value through AI, all you're doing is, matching your competitors. So I think CX is a really interesting one because, look, a brand is only as good as its experience. Right? And if you can use AI to improve that experience, your customers are going to be more loyal to you, because loyalty is very fluid these days, as you well know. So if we can create a really great customer experience, why wouldn't your customers stay with you? And when I look at CX, you kind of say, look, you mentioned that there's a lot of stuff in CX. Yeah, there's a lot of clunky stuff in CX. And on one level, it's a bit like do you remember those scientific calculators we had at school where you used about 5 functions and you didn't use any of the rest? So there's a lot of that sort of things happening as well. So they have systems that are capable of doing things, but they're not using them. And they don't know how to use them. But equally, some of those systems are corralling them into paths that are not actually appropriate for what they really want to do. So I think part of the issue here, Scott, is to sort of say, well, okay, let's unpack CX and sort of say, what is it we need to be doing to excel and to really differentiate our experience vis-a-vis our competitors? And how do we use AI? So that could be in a whole host of fronts. Like, one of the most interesting ones, I think, is maybe if we went back a year or 2 years, you hired a new person into your call center. It might have taken 6, 9 months to train them. Well, now you might train them in a week because you got an AI agent in their ear prompting them real time as to what they should do. Right? And the AI agent may be translating a language that they don't speak real time for them as well. So this ability to really give a great service is up for grabs. And I think that starts to really change the dynamic in terms of customer experience, because a lot of our customer experience, as you know, is outsourced. But we're not looking for labor arbitrage anymore. What we're looking for is intelligent augmentation. And CX lends itself to that. And it's a win for everyone because your customer is going to be absolutely happy because you solved their problem, you gave them a great experience, or you helped them achieve whatever they want. And there was no sort of, bouncing them around or saying, well, I don't have that information, or actually I need to transfer you to departments. It's there, it's real time, and it's one and done. And the customer feels valued, that they feel you understand them, that you know them, that you can anticipate their needs, and that you can meet their needs. So CX is one of those areas. I think I think one of the most exciting things about AI is the ability for organizations to become truly customer centric, because a lot of organizations, they give lip service, so we're customer centric, and it's in their it's in their annual accounts where we're a customer centric organization. Yeah, you're not really, because that's not how you operate in practice. You don't have the data to be able to do it, and you're not organized or aligned around that. You have pockets of centricity, but you don't operate as a customer-centric organization. Now, if we think about AI and we sort of say, well, if we want to be truly customer-centric, and we can sort out our infrastructure, so make sure we have all the data, the right data, that's interoperable, that it's available to everyone, we can now start to move into a world where customer experience is real. It's value adding. It's creating experiences that customers love. And that's where I think the real prize is. So I would say, Scott, look, yeah, there's things happening, but have organizations figured out that actually this could be the one where they can totally change their organization? No, I don't think so. And I think it's problematic in that, as with all disruptive technologies, the approach is, well, let's add this in too. It's not about adding in, it's about rethinking your enterprise.
So at a high level, then, this is a matter of superpowering the humans in the customer experience operation rather than replacing them in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, it depends on the business, and in some businesses, it may be a cost factor. But at the end of the day, what you're saying is, from reading it back, the opportunity to differentiate here is in doing more with the people that you have, getting them closer to the customer, not having them chase information, powering them with insights to be able to drive a much better engagement with the end client when they finally do get to a human, at whatever point that is.
I totally. And look, Scott, if you think about it, as someone calls into the CX person, and they're trying to navigate loads of screens. I mean, that's not what we want them to do. We want them to be empathetic. We want them to be responsive. We want them to make the customer feel valued. So why not simplify all that and give them the information in real time so they can have the right conversation? So I think though the challenge will be, I think, particularly in the Western culture, this focus on quarterly results, the pressure point. Well, can we just use this to take people out, as opposed to, no, let's use this to augment our people, to your point, so that our people are superstars and we don't have them doing mundane work or, chasing things they shouldn't have to chase. But actually, we have them in a situation where they have everything they need to give a great experience to customers, because most employees want to serve their customers well. The problem isn't their attitude. The problem is, what supports them.
Yeah, completely. I mean, super interesting. Do you find, you work internationally. Most of the business, I have a history of working internationally, but in my current role, it's largely domestic U.S. And I find this so interesting around customer experience. Do you feel like consumer expectations are different, like culturally and kind of in Europe and kind of in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think first thing is, look, what digital disruption has done is raise the bar in terms of experience expectations for everyone. But I think, the Western culture is, very individualistic. As you move more east, it's more, consensus, collective, whatnot. I think time horizons are also different. We tend to be very short term and focused. Next quarter results. other parts of the world actually know they're actually, you take the Middle East, it's all 2030. What can we achieve in the next 5, 6 years?
Yeah.
You take, other parts of Asia. Well, what can we achieve in the next 30 years? So, we don't operate on that basis. So I think, and part of what we're now seeing with AI is that, the large language models are becoming geographically relevant. So the Middle East is building large language models that are based on the Middle East. China the same, India the same, Europe, certainly in France, they're building large language models that are appropriate to their culture, their society, and to their value system. So I think that has yet to play out because we're in early days of that. But for a whole host of reasons, including digital sovereignty, that is all on the cards today. And organizations all over the world are looking at this, and they're having to, you mentioned cloud, they're having to be very strategic now in terms of, okay, well, if we use cloud, like where is the cloud? What does that mean for our data? If we're going to use AI, well, whose platform are we using, or whose large language model are we using? What does that mean for our data? So this is actually, in terms of strategic decision making, this is moving right up the board agenda. Whereas before, I think boards would be kind of, oh yeah, well that's just outsourcing or it's cloud or whatever. No. This is actually at the heart of your organization now. And if you get it wrong, it actually has big consequences. So I think there's a shift in terms of how organizations are starting to realize the game is different, and that they need to have a considered position. And they also need to be thinking about this as a basis for competitive differentiation to the start of the conversation. There's no point in us having the same models if we're producing the same outputs because, so we might as well merge.
The whole kind of governance around AI, particularly in I find the whole EU experiment around this to be super interesting too. When you're like, well, I mean, AI in and of itself is also a means to develop very quick malware and, leverage the data. So what happens when this depends on which side of the aisle you are. So I'll just use general terms, the good guys decide we're going to follow these standards, but the bad guys don't. And what are the good guys' standards worth, at the end of the day? And then it just becomes it's almost the same kind of argument around the global economy and all of the other things that we have cultural differences on region to region. I don't know that there was a question there, but I find it so interesting to think about as we're going through this.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, you're right. And look, the bad guys invest, if not as much more, maybe even. But this brings it back to, from a governance perspective, if we don't know all the answers because it's still so fluid and it's changing so rapidly, it needs a governance system that is principle-based and flexible at the same time. So, what are the underlying principles that we want to apply in terms of how we use technology in the business from a security perspective, from an ethical perspective, from a responsible use perspective. And those principles then need to be embedded into the organization. Now, I think there's a growing awareness amongst boards and C-level executives that, actually we need to get this right. But there was a great paper the other day, and basically it was sort of saying, but the challenge now is going to be that these models are going to be so clever, they won't actually tell you what their reasoning is. In fact, they might disguise it. So you think that, okay, put that in a governance context. How are we going to manage that? Because I think one of the challenges, look, if we think of our organizations, they're built on army-style command and control. But now we're moving into a world where it's around intelligence orchestration. And some of those, people will be people, some of them will be agents, digital agents. And those digital agents will be, doing their own reasoning and taking decisions and doing things. But as a leader, you're going to have to orchestrate it all. Right? And that challenges the very concept of leadership because I no longer have all the information. I'm no longer the most, knowledgeable person at the top of the organization. I'm actually dealing with, people who are smarter and agents who are much smarter than me. And my job is to make sure that the right level of intelligence is working together in a safe and responsible way that safeguards the organization so that we're actually achieving great outcomes. And I'm not sure that organizations have worked this one through.
No, not at all. I mean, the other thing that occurs to me as we're thinking about that, right, is the, kind of the concept of history is in the hands of those who write it. right? At the end of the day. So, when we have autonomous agents working inside the business, and we've also got this idea that you've got kind of commonality of responses that are being generated in large language models over time that become the basis of our thinking, that's way more the risk to me than, the sci-fi version of the robots taking over the world.
Yeah.
Right? Which is
Terminator.
that history is written, by OpenAI, right? And they mean that do you think about that risk as you're consulting with businesses?
I think organizations work on span of control. I think they need to work on span of intent. So, what are we actually trying to achieve here? What is it we're setting out to do? And then to start to understand through our humans and through our digital agents or whatever you want to call them, are we actually operating to that, or are we doing something different? Because look, I can guarantee you, Scott, there are going to be court cases in the future where, executives are going to be saying, well, I didn't realize the technology did that. and, and the issue is, look, the economists would say that humans are rational, and, the psychologists would say we're far from rational. In fact, we do lots of things that are not in our best interests, right? We drive past the gym on the way home and things like that, right? Well, but the behavioral economists would say, well, actually, we can predict just how irrational people are, and we could take advantage of that. And it has happened, in the UK and financial services, etc. But if you now put that into the domain of AI, where AI actually can understand all these patterns, and they can understand that actually customers are not doing what's in their best interest, and, their parameters have been set, maximize profitability at all costs, you can see what's going to happen. And the issue is that, by the time you find out, all of your customers have been impacted. It's not like having a rogue employee who maybe, audit pick up after, a dozen cases or whatever, and they say, hang on, there's something wrong here. Scott's after we don't know what's Scott doing. He's outside the parameters here. Well, actually, what were the parameters in the first place? Right? Because we don't know, because it's opaque. And it's not just one customer, it's all our customers. So there's a real challenge in this as I see it.
Tony, I really appreciate the time. This was super entertaining for IT leaders who were tuning in, aside from obviously connecting with Bridgepoint, as we would hope they would do, and asking, how do we get a hold of Tony? How can they get a hold of you?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. You find me on LinkedIn. I write prolifically on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, my thoughts and ideas are there.
Frankly, your writings were what, got our editorial staff paying attention to you and then hooked us up. So anybody, I highly recommend you check out Tony. He's got great writing on the topic. Thrilled to have had you on the show. I hope we get an opportunity to do it again.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Scott. I really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Well, that is a wrap on this episode of the Bridgecast. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, it certainly gave me something to think about. We would love for you to hit subscribe, leave us a review, share it with your team. Your engagement is what keeps programs like the Bridgecast going, and we will be excited to see you on a future episode. Thanks so much. Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we're appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out bridgepointtechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there in business and in life. Do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.